Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess to Impress with coverage of round 3 of the 2018 Tata Steel tournament, played on the 15th of January. It was another eventful round. I will show you the results at the end of the video and the standings, but first let's look at one of the games. We're going to look at the game again of the great man from Chennai, from India, Vishwanathan Anand. He played in round 3 with white against the American Fabiano Caruana, and Caruana is one of the candidates who will play for the right to challenge Magnus Carlsen at the end of this year. Anand played e4, e5 from Caruana, knight f3 and knight f6, the Russian defense, also called the Petrov defense. Anand played knight takes e5, which is the most popular move. Knight c3 and d4 are other major possibilities, but Anand played the main line with knight takes e5. Caruana kicked the knight back to f3, and he took on e4. Two central pawns have already vanished off the board after only 4 moves, which is one of the reasons why the Petrov has a reputation of a drawish opening. d4, d5, bishop d3, bishop d6. Caruana has played this setup with black many times, so Anand could have expected it, and he indeed did some preparation on this line before the game. He castled, and Caruana castled c4, c6, and queen c2. Anand said afterwards that he had seen in his preparation that recently nobody had played this move, queen c2, in this position against Caruana, even though Caruana had played this setup many times. Knight a6, and now there's a little threat. The threat is to jump to b4, and then there is a fork, and that way black will win the bishop pair. That's why Anand played a3 to prevent knight b4. Bishop g4, knight e5, attacking that bishop on g4, and the bishop went to f5. b4 from Anand, it's all still theory, and Anand said afterwards that he went into this line with some trepidation because he knew that Caruana probably had an idea or a novelty in this line. But he said, okay, I just play the main line and show me what you have prepared. It's a good attitude. Caruana played knight c7, and Anand played f3 to kick the knight. And look at this move. This is quite an amazing game, and look at this crazy move. Caruana did not retreat the knight, he did not take on e5. What did he play? He played bishop g6. Well, this is the first line of the engine, so of course it had been prepared by Caruana, and this is only a move you can make if you have prepared it. And in the live broadcast they had some fun with this move, saying, oh, I thought it was black to move here, because of course white can take that knight on e4. One of the points, by the way, of bishop g6 is that it is out of the reach of this rook once the f-file opens up. So what happens if you just take that knight? F takes e4. It's not a good move, because then black plays bishop takes e5, and you take the bishop, d takes e4, bishop takes e4. Yes, white is a piece up, but the last move in this variation is queen d4 check, and it is a queen fork. It's check, and the rook in a corner is hanging, and that rook is unprotected, so black will win a full rook and will be material up. So you cannot take, after bishop g6, you cannot take on e4. Anand, of course, saw that. He looked at different variations here. He looked at knight takes g6, and then it's good to take with the f-pawn, so that the rook opens up and black hopes to get an attack going. Here it's not good to take on e4, because then queen h4, and black seems to have a dangerous attack. Anand said afterwards he felt it was too dangerous to enter this. He calculated that black has a perpetual check, but he said, if I miss one move in my calculations, then it could be lost and I can resign. this is a possible variation. There's a checkmate threat on h2, so you have to do something against that. You can play g3, but then bishop takes, and this looks indeed very scary for white, and Anand did not want to go into it. So after, let's go back, bishop g6 we had, and then Anand looked at knight takes g6, f takes g6, and we saw that we cannot take on e4, that's too dangerous after queen h4. Anand also looked at c5, and he gave this variation afterwards. Queen takes h2, king takes, queen h4 check, king back, knight g3, bishop b2, and then it looks like black has a perpetual, and he does. Queen h1 check, king f2, queen h4, but black has a lot stronger. Instead of queen h1, he can play knight e6, followed by knight f4, and this is a very strong attack, and in fact black is winning here. So Anand did not want to go for that either. So after bishop g6, he decided not to take on g6, he decided to play c5. Caruana took on e5, that piece was taken back, and now Caruana saves his knight, knight g5. Here an instructive move from Anand. He played bishop b2, and he explained afterwards that it is important to play bishop b2 first and only then knight d2, because if you play knight d2 first, then we have this line. Bishop takes d3, queen takes, and f5. And as Anand said, black is going to put a knight on e6 and is absolutely fine. If you take en passant, the queen takes back and black is fine. That's not possible after the move from the game, bishop b2. If you then play the same move, bishop takes d3, queen takes, and f5, then, or even f6, then white takes on f6, and now black has to shatter his pawn structure. He cannot take back with the queen or with the rook because the bishop is now on b2. And after g takes f6, this looks not as good for black as the other variation. So quite instructive, play the bishop b2 move first and only then develop your knight. Here Anand explained that black has to make some strategically risky decisions, as white has now a threat of knight d2 and then f4 and f5, and that's hard to stop. So Caruana had to do something, and he decided to play in d4. He's going to sacrifice material because f4 comes and the knight is hanging, and you cannot retreat the knight to e6 because then there is f5 with a nice fork. So after f4, Caruana played knight d5. He's sacrificing that knight on g5. Anand took it, and knight e3. And now this knight is giving a fork. So black is going to win the rook for 2 pieces. Queen d2. Anand saves his queen. Bishop takes, and here Anand said afterwards that he looked at rook f4 as a move with crazy complications, but he felt it wasn't good. And he was right, the computer doesn't like it. So in the end he just took back on d3. Knight takes f1, king takes f1, queen takes g5, knight d2, white needs to develop, queen takes e5, another pawn, and here Anand played knight f3, a natural move, but he said afterwards that he should have played knight c4, giving away another pawn. Queen takes h2, but after queen takes d4, and that's threatening checkmate on g7. So black has to play something like f6. Then there is knight d6, and that's a beautiful square for that beautiful knight. And Anand said, maybe I should have gone for this because black will not win this game because of his extra pawn. But with my knight on d6, my prospects have improved a lot. It would have been worth the investment of a pawn. Quite interesting to hear the thoughts of a super grandmaster about these things. Give him up a pawn. It will not cost him the game, he thinks, but a knight on d6 may win him the game. he felt he should have gone for this in the analysis afterwards. But as said, he played knight f3, also a natural move. Queen h5, the queen was attacked. Queen takes d4 with that same checkmate threat on g7. Caruana played f6 to deal with the checkmate threat, and Anand said afterwards that he had assessed this as about equal during the game, and the computer agrees. Anand played queen c4 check, and we have another instructive moment here. He was hoping here for queen f7 to shield the check, because then he would have swapped the queens, rook takes, and the knight goes back to d2. And Anand said, now I'm getting my knight on d6. The knight will go to d6, either through c4 or through e4. And this way Anand will get that strong piece on that square. Caruana didn't fall for this. He played king h8 instead. And another instructive moment. This bishop is biting on granite, as Anand said. And he needed to find another diagonal for that bishop. He played bishop c1 on its way to f4 and later d6, and the bishop is much better there. Rook fe8 was played by Caruana. There comes bishop to f4, and here Anand said this was the moment that Caruana went wrong. He showed this plan for black, queen f5, and that's threatening. Rook e4 with another fork that wins the piece. So white plays bishop d6, and then he gave this plan for black: rook e3, rook a e8, and black will double there on the e file. White will play king g1, h3, probably king h2, maybe rook a2 to f2, just giving possibilities for black's pieces and white's pieces. And also very instructive here is that Anand said that with the bishop on d6, a sacrifice on f3 by the rook, rook takes f3, is not such a big deal. Black will not get such a strong attack because this bishop is covering a lot of important squares on the king side. But Caruana did not go for queen f5, he played a5. And Anand said that Caruana must have miscalculated here. Anand played bishop d6. He explained afterwards that he was worried for a while about, let's take that move back, about black playing a4 and then rook e3 to b3. But then he convinced himself that it was not such a big deal because he could play b5. So that was not such a big deal. He also explained that he had thought about playing b takes a5 here, rook takes a5, and then bishop d6, with the idea of playing queen b4, putting pressure on the b7 pawn. If that pawn falls, the c6 pawn will also be weak. And he said after king g1 and h3, his king will be 100% safe. Again, very insightful to hear how a super grandmaster thinks. He makes a plan to attack a weak pawn, and at the same time he keeps an eye on his king and makes sure his king is safe. And then he combines all those ideas together. Quite amazing. In the end, after a5, Anand decided on bishop d6, and then he was very surprised when Caruana took on b4. He took back, and Anand said, now I get this position for free. That is, with the rook on a8 and not on a5, where it is a lot more active and the other rook can then go to a8. And now he thought white had a big advantage. Of course, the pawn on b7 is very weak. Caruana played queen d5, and there goes that pawn. And Anand explained here, in this position it's great to have two minor pieces against the rook, as the c6 pawn is so weak, and it will be very hard to defend that pawn for black. It's good to have two minor pieces here instead of the rook. He showed another crazy variation Anand did. In this position he showed rook takes a3, a rook sacrifice, And I'll show you the line. Rook takes, Queen d1 check, King f2, Queen c2 check, King g3, white is winning. It looks scary. Queen g6 check, King h3, Queen h5 check, Knight interposes, g5, and then Queen b4, and white wins. You can take the piece, but the Queen takes back, and of course you invested a rook, so white is now a piece up. This is a variation that Anand saw when he took on b7. And it doesn't work, so Caruana did not go for it. He played h6. King g1 from Anand. He's going to look after his king first. Rook a4 and h3 safety first. White is now taking the g4 square away, and this bishop is controlling very important squares, as I said before. Rook c4. Caruana is going to attack. Queen b2, Queen d3, and here a very nice move. Rook a2. And also Grandmaster van Kampen in the studio really liked this move. Anand said he realized that the second rank is more dangerous than the first in this position. He showed another possibility. After Queen d3 he could have played Queen d2, and it's another crazy variation. I'll show it to you. Queen takes, Knight takes, Rook c2, attacking the Knight, Knight f3, and there comes the second rook to the second rank. It looks very dangerous, but there is Knight e1. Amazing move. Anand saw all this. It's protecting the g2 square, it's attacking the rook, so the variation continued with Rook a2, Rook takes, Knight d3, Rook takes a3, and Knight b4. And black cannot defend the c6 pawn, so white wins, as Anand said. You cannot go here to protect the pawn, because the knight is covering that square. Very, very nice. But as I said, Rook a2 was played instead of Queen d2. Queen d1 check. Black is trying to make it work on the first rank. King h2, Rook c1, but Anand was not worried about his bottom rank with Queen and Rook there. He just played a4. He said he was relaxing here. Well, I would not relax with Queen and Rook on my bottom rank. But Queen h1 is just a check. There's no follow-up after King g3. The white king is perfectly fine. After a4, Caruana played f5. Of course, he wants to play f4 to take the g3 square away from the king. But Anand did not worry about that. He played Queen b7. After f4, that pawn was just taken. Yes, that meant that Caruana could take on c5. Anand played Rook d2. That rook is protected by bishop and knight. Queen takes pawn. Queen f7. Anand is taking over the attack. Rook g8, the rook on e8 is hanging, so Caruana played Rook g8. Bishop e5, beautiful move. Now there's many threats. Rook d8 is a threat. Knight g5 is a threat. Rook d7 is a threat. And Anand expected resignation here from Caruana, but Caruana still found a move. Queen c4. And Anand admitted afterwards very sportingly that he had missed this move, but he soon found a brilliant move. If you haven't seen it yet, look here for yourself. If you find it, then I'm really impressed, because it's not an easy move to find. Anand played the beautiful move, Rook d2 to d6. And he said later that it's a pity that there's no beauty prize in this tournament, because he thought Rook d6 was a good candidate for that. And we'll see a tweet later from somebody who also liked Rook d6. One last crazy variation. Anand said in his interview afterwards that he thought that bishop g7 check also wins here. But he calculated, and within a few seconds he saw the refutation, which is Rook takes g7, Rook d8 check, King a7, Knight g5 check, and both rooks are now pinned. This rook is pinned, and this rook is also pinned, as Anand said. because the queen will then be unprotected. But black has rook c takes g5 anyway, giving away the queen, but checkmating white. Rook takes g2 check, king h1, another check, king h2, and the other rook gives checkmate. A wonderful variation which Anand saw within a few seconds. So after queen c4, bishop takes g7 does not work, and as said, Anand played rook d6, and here Fabiano Caruana resigned. Why did he resign? Let's look at the threats. If you take the queen that is unprotected on f7, there is a mate in 1, rook takes h6, and the g-pawn is pinned by the bishop. If you try something else, if you try king h7 to take rook takes h6 out of the equation, then there is queen g6 check, king h8, and the same checkmate move now with the queen. One last move, if we play queen c1 to protect the h6 pawn, then rook d8, and this wins easily for white. The rook cannot take because of queen takes g7, checkmate. What an amazing game, and it's great to get Anand's comments straight after the game. He came straight into the live broadcast to explain the game to the viewers, and I gave the main variations that he showed. This is a nice picture. You see Anand executing his last move, rook d6, and you see Fabiano Caruana there on the left. He looked at the move and he knew what was coming. And there was a tweet from the world champion saying rook d6 exclamation mark at Vichy64 the king, hashtag still got it. Carlsen also liked that move. The results of round 3. Ho Yifan got her first draw after 2 losses. It's not easy to play against Vladimir Kramnik with black anyway, but definitely not after having lost the first 2 games in the tournament. But she made a draw. Well done, Ho Yifan. Peter Svidler and Anish Giri played a draw. Giri, of course, the proud leader after 2 rounds with 2 wins. He got a draw in the 3rd round. Magnus Carlsen played a very quick draw against Wijk. Jones, last year he won the Challengers and he won his first game in the Masters against poor Adiban, who had lost his 2nd game in a row. We saw Anand against Caruana. Wesley So far has made 3 draws, as has Sergei Karyakin. And Mamedyarov, who won yesterday against Ho Yifan, made a draw against the Russian Grandmaster Matlakov. The standings after round 3. Anish Giri now in the lead together with Vishwanathan Anand. 3 players, half a point behind Carlsen, Mamedyarov and Jones. 4 players on 50%, Kramnik, Karyakin, Svidler and So. The last 3 have drawn all their games so far. Caruana, Matlikov and Wijk on -1, and Adiban and Ho Yifan are in last place. Hope you enjoyed this video, this game from Anand and his masterclass in the analysis afterwards. If you did, please give the video a thumbs up, please subscribe to the Chess to Impress channel, please leave a comment, and if you liked the video it would be great if you could share it on social media. You also may want to check out my Chess to Progress channel, the link is in the description box. This is Rick for Chess to Impress. Thank you for watching.